Hi, I'm Rayleigh, and this is Maddie. Today we will be talking to you about the First Amendment and what it means for the rights of the press and media in the U.S.
The First Amendment forbids the federal government from violating individuals' freedom of expression, speech, and freedom of press. This can be related to as the right to expressing an individual's religion or speaking as they wish. Media is a means of mass communication such as newspapers, news channels, and any other type of press. The First Amendment allows the media or press to publish as they wish because it pertains to free speech. It limits the government from censoring the views of Americans and the material which the media is allowed to print.
Prior restraint is government action that prohibits speech or other expression before the speech happens. In other words, it is the government stopping information from being released to the public if it will harm the country or citizens. Prior restraint is allowed by the First Amendment. However, there are certain cases where the government's claim to prior restraint is overturned.
For example, in the case of New York Times Co. versus the United States government attempted to stop the New York Times from publishing a collection of classified government documents called the Pentagon Papers. The government argued that because these papers were classified, the press did not have the right to release them. However, the Supreme Court ruled that the government did not have proof that the classification of these papers provided true security and ruled with the New York Times. They said that in order for prior restraint to be in effect, the government needed to prove that releasing the publication would cause direct danger to the U.S., and in this case, they could not.
These papers, as previously stated, were called the Pentagon Papers. They contained information on the history of the U.S. and Indochina from World War II. Daniel Ellsberg worked for a research company, the RAND Corporation, and got access to these papers. He realized a lot of the information the government had given the public was false, and the Pentagon Papers revealed this. He felt he had a duty to the country to inform them about the government's lies and false information. He gave the papers to the New York Times to print. For this, he is called a whistleblower, because he blew the whistle on what the government was doing behind the public's back.
On June 13, 1971, the New York Times began publishing a series of articles on the Pentagon Papers, revealing lots of information that was considered top secret. After the third daily post by the New York Times, the U.S. Department of Justice put a temporary restraining order against the publication, stopping any more information regarding the Pentagon Papers from coming out. However, only about 15 days later, the U.S. Supreme Court freed the newspapers to print as they wished in a 6-3 decision. The court ruled on behalf of prior restraint and the First Amendment, and that the government had failed to justify restraint on publication.
Thanks for listening, and we hope you learned a lot about what rights the press has when it comes to publication, as well as the meaning of prior restraint and the First Amendment.